Welcome to Winning on Issues, the Texas Government Affairs podcast showcasing the leaders executing on policy and delivering results. I'm your host, James Dickey, former chairman of the Republican Party of Texas. As the founder of Ryan Data and Research, Derek is best known for his deep understanding of Texas voter data and his incredibly popular analysis of each general election's results. While campaigns have benefited from his expertise since his time at the Republican Party of Texas, his work has also had positive impact in voter registration efforts, voter education efforts, operations, and data logistics. Derek, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it is really my pleasure. We both spent some time at the Republican Party of Texas.
We did.
Tell us how you got into that.
Well, so it's actually interesting. I'd been going to the University of Texas for a few years, still had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do, and just happened to take a trip up to Washington, D.C. and sat there in the House chamber, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool, and got home and applied for an internship on the Hill, and you can say the rest is history.
That is amazing, and as a big part of that history, you managed the master voter file for the Republican Party of Texas for a decade. Now, for our listeners who are agency heads or managing large organizations, what did you learn about data hygiene and database management and the operational challenge of keeping a massive multi-million record complex data set accurate and usable?
Sure. I think the first thing that I learned is I'm a little bit out of Excel's range in dealing with data. So I had to learn some Microsoft Access, SQL, some other programming languages. And then, I've learned that standardization of data is crucial on, keeping it fresh and accurate.
Well, and dealing with voter data, undoubtedly, anytime I need reliable Texas data, I talk to you. You've been working with Secretary of State's office for years. Tell us a little bit about the best practices in making sure that you get the right data, especially when dealing with state agency.
Sure. So, I think that you need to have a good relationship with the staff members that you're going to be requesting data from. And ask the questions like what's the data structure, what's it going to include, what's not going to be included, how often do you refresh it? With the Secretary of State's voter registration database, it's live, so it's being refreshed, daily, hourly, down to the minute. But there's some other state agencies that may not necessarily update their file on, an hourly basis.
Well, and it's important to know when you're getting data with how old that data is and how it's structured, and that is absolutely a great point. Well, we hear the term evidence-based policy all the time. From your perspective, what's the single biggest mistake that leaders make when they first try to use data to make decisions?
I think that the first mistake is that they want to make an emotional decision, and the data might say something otherwise, but they still have a gut feeling, and so sometimes the mistake is that they want to go with the gut feeling over what the data is actually telling them. Well,
there is actually some psychology that indicates that we all, no matter how data-driven we think we are, we all tend to make emotional decisions and then look for things to back that up. And there's a lot of research that shows that we will far too easily discount stuff we don't want to see and believe stuff that matches up with what we want to see, no matter how solid it is or not.
Absolutely. And I've gone into some projects thinking that the results were going to be one way, and then when I did a little bit more research, it was completely opposite. So, even those that deal with the data have some preconceived notions that could end up being wrong.
Absolutely, and it is important, especially when dealing with public policy, that we make decisions that are actually based on the results.
Absolutely.
So this podcast focuses on drivers of change. In your view, is data a driver of a change or just a way to measure the changes we're making?
I think it's a little bit of both, and I think that's probably a cop-out answer. But I really do think that it's both. It's a driver of change. What I think where we're headed is we're going to get to a point where the data is instantaneous and you can see trends as they're happening. And, the best example I can think of is a few election cycles ago, Harris County was running out of ballots at some polling locations. And so if those polling locations are online and the central office knows how many people are showing up to vote, in the early hours of the morning, then they can use the data to say, we need to send more ballots out to these locations. Maybe not these locations over here, but we'll focus on getting more out to those locations.
Well, and that kind of responsiveness, and especially real-time responsiveness, is a really important thing for government to do in order to serve people well.
Absolutely. And, it's a big state, 254 counties, thousands of local jurisdictions. And so, as we get stronger and stronger on data usage, I think it's going to tie all of these together and make, hopefully, everybody's life easier.
No kidding. And I know several agency heads who are working very hard to try to make that happen. You talked earlier about how sometimes the data points you in a direction you didn't expect when you started. That's fantastic. How do you put together the story from the data to make sure that when you present it, it's received as well as possible?
So I think early on, my mistake was being too numbers based, and obviously, I look at databases all day long. So of course, I'm a little bit biased towards the numbers. But the more and more I presented, I learned that graphics are always the best way to go to get your point across. And the thing that I finally realized is, there was a reason the USA Today newspaper was as successful as it was, is because they did a really good job of putting information in infographics that were easy for people to understand.
That's absolutely true. If they don't really see it in a way they can understand, then how can they believe it and take action on it?
Exactly.
That is so important. Well, and we're seeing a transformation in society and in tech right now with the advancement of AI. Potentially one of the benefits from that is that there'll be less preconceived notion, that the AI may be more willing to accept the the truth from the numbers, and perhaps more able to find the meaning in the numbers without multiple level of translation. What do you expect to see in terms of the impact of AI on the use of data in government services going forward?
I absolutely love AI and have been using it for a year or two now. Just from my perspective, I've been using it to write lengthy queries that would have probably taken hours to write. I can just in plain English tell it, here's what I want it to do. Hit enter, and then 30 seconds later, it pops out the query that I need. So I think that AI is going to streamline, and I spoke about how quickly we're going to have access to data. AI is going to do that. I deal with registered voters. There are 18 million registered voters in the state. I can look for trends with my eyes in the data, but when you're dealing with 18 million records, you're probably going to miss some, just very unique trend. And AI, comes into the picture and finds it nearly instantly.
It is going to be a real game changer, I have no doubt. How do you protect decision-making? We've been talking about how you take the data and you make the story and you present it in a way that people can understand it. But one of the challenges is in decision-making, There can often be vanity metrics. There can be a lot of noise in with the signal. And sometimes while what gets measured gets managed, sometimes people are measuring things because they're easy to measure, not because they're important. Mm-hmm. And that measurement can in fact lead them down a wrong trail.
Right.
How do you avoid that mess of including data points that look really good in a report but don't actually make the difference in implementation?
I think the biggest thing that you have to keep in your mind, and sometimes you have to tell other people, is why. Why do you want this? Why do you need this? Going back to the political aspects, I've seen statewide candidates that want to travel to every state or every county, all 254 counties, or they want to mail to all 254 counties. And, I have to ask them why. Here's a group of voters that we have in specific areas that we've already identified. And if we succeed with those groups, then you don't necessarily need to travel to. It's great for PR, but why do you want to do it when we know that this other plan is going to work instead?
Well, and that's even more important when we're talking about an agency and we're talking about stewarding taxpayer resources.
Right.
And to make sure that they're serving the population well, but they're serving our citizens well, but they're not wasting resources on things that they might prefer, but don't actually move the needle. Let's talk about some agency stuff. A bunch of departments, including HHSC and TexStats, sit on mountains of data about citizens and services. From your perspective, what's the single biggest untapped opportunity for agencies in using their own data to improve execution?
I think that they could see what areas of their agency are possibly being overworked, and that's within their agency, but also geographically. There are plenty of state agencies that have offices around the state, and using data, they could see, okay, well, we've got a district office in Amarillo that's staffed by X number of people, and their caseload is 5 times larger than the caseload of the 3 people working in Laredo. So maybe we need to divert some resources to Amarillo, maybe not at the expense of Laredo, but find some areas that they could shift some of the resources around.
Well, and an alternative in that situation, thanks to now distributed systems and more online information, they could, depending on how they can divide up the work, they could divert some of the work to a less overwhelmed office.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other things is, spending. I think that the data within the agency, you could see what's being spent and where's it being spent a lot easier than 10, 20 years ago. And there's the possibility of maybe cutting some frivolous spending. How much are they paying for paper clips in Abilene? Versus how much they're paying for them in Dallas. And it's along with AI, you can have it look for trends. What are the rent? What are the rent rates in this city, and why are we paying over those averages for our space in that city?
No question, there's a lot of things people can do. You've worked on some of those constituent services, and how can a state agency use data not just to react to constituent complaints, but to predict problems?
Well, so before the school year started, we were talking to our daughter's principal, and she told us, well, we're having a hard time finding some teachers for these grades, these positions. And it kind of got me thinking. It's like, well, so the TEA has a database of teachers, Is there a place where school administrators can go to find people who, may have moved recently to a new area and are still looking for, a teaching position? Or are there people who aren't, who decided that they didn't want to teach this year? Maybe, if somebody reached out to them, maybe they'd be willing to come back. So, there are all sorts of opportunities for agencies that license their professionals to, find things like this.
No kidding. Just thinking through that example, they could take the data on licensed teachers in Texas and match it to the new movers into their area, and they could quickly identify potential new employees.
Absolutely. And another thing is a lot of these professions have continuing education programs. And, if they don't finish those within a certain time, their license gets suspended. Is the state agency keeping their addresses current? Could they be working with the Secretary of State's, voter registration database or DPS's driver's license and see that, okay, here's, my wife's a real estate agent. Here's Andrea Ryan. She's moved. She's updated her driver's license, but she hasn't updated her address with the Real Estate Commission. So maybe she doesn't get notices that her license is going to expire at the end of the month. So this, agencies working together could benefit the agencies and the professionals that rely on those agencies. And she is current, by the way.
Yeah, just to be clear. Well, and that actually brings up a really good set of information. So there's a lot of positive things that agencies can use for their own benefit. More and more, though, and Texas is really a leader on this, public information and public data. The state of Texas does respect the fact that the taxpayers paid for that, and therefore it should be available to the taxpayers when they want.
Sure.
How have you seen the agencies manage the potential conflict between the personally identifiable information and transparency to make sure that they're letting the data that the public paid for be public, but also being careful about people's privacy and protection?
Sure. This is a great question. And it's actually funny because I'm very protective of my data. My wife, she applies for all of the subscription cards from the grocery stores, Starbucks, McDonald's, and I don't do that. It's like they don't need my information. So I understand that there are people that want to keep their information confidential, and the legislature's actually, kind of cut off a bunch of the data that is available, at least from you can't get home addresses anymore of attorneys or doctors or any professionals like that. So the legislature's kind of putting a lock on a whole bunch of the data. But there's still data available out there. Obviously the voter registration database is still public information because the candidates, campaigns, other interest groups need that information. But we can still get a list of attorneys, just names, maybe not their location, but I haven't looked, but there are probably one, maybe two James Dickeys in the States, so it would be pretty easy to match that to a specific person. I mean, there are 3 Derek Ryans in the state, so right. You'd have to do a little bit of, figuring out how to match the data, which person that goes to. But, the state's doing a really good job about making sure that there's enough data that's going out to where, things are transparent, but we're not creating security concerns at the same time.
Yeah, and I've seen some of that. I've stayed involved with the election process, and for a long time, Texas law has protected the home addresses of judges, for example, for good reason and for obvious reason, and certain elected officials. Well, they've expanded that a little bit down to election officials for, again, fairly obvious reasons. And right. I think that's a good thing. And having it be an opt-in process, so you have to execute and you have to request that protection.
Sure.
I think that makes sense too, because it's not necessarily something everyone wants or needs.
Right.
But when someone does, it's a good thing that's available for them.
And I think that we saw an instance where too much data might not necessarily be a good thing. 2 years ago, when the chairman of the Republican Party of Texas at the time, Matt Rinaldi's ballot got released from the primary, and showed who he voted for in the presidential race, and that. That came about because people could access, the specific ballot, the ballot form, where he voted, what day, what exact time, he checked into a polling location. So with all of that, they were easily able to link back to a specific ballot. So there's a balancing act between enough data and, maybe too much data.
Yeah, and for anybody who's concerned about that, there actually have been some changes now. And
Absolutely.
So counties are being more diligent about making sure they're not using sequential ballots for obvious reasons. And they also, a useful thing to do is go on a busy day and go at a busy location. If you do that, there's automatic anonymity and voter ballot secrecy just in numbers.
Exactly.
Because the odds of you being the only one to vote in your precinct on that day will be nearly zero.
Exactly.
Right? So that's good. So we've talked about the use of data and protection of data. What about the rollout of it systemically? So over the last couple of decades, we've seen big changes from, client server architecture to cloud architecture. We were talking earlier. Unfortunately, today there was a significant outage on the day we're filming this of Cloudflare that brought down over 20% of the internet and had significant fallout. And so far this year, we've had a couple of AWS outages. What is your recommendation to agencies as they build out to make sure that they're in their effort to be transparent and to be state of the art, that they don't accidentally put themselves in a brand new problem?
Right. So, one of my first bosses in politics, we were getting ready for a state convention, and he said, "Okay, put this on a thumb drive." I said, "Okay, I got to put it on a floppy disk back in the day when we had floppy disks." And he said, "And email it to me, and then put it on another thumb drive." And I said, "Isn't this a little too overboard?" And he says, "No, because at least one of those will fail, possibly two, and we'll still have access to the data." I have my databases in the cloud, but I also have a database on my own computer. It's backed up by Carbonite. I've got an external hard drive that backs that data up, and I've got a fourth backup as well. So, always back up the data. And it seems like we hear about the cloud. Some cloud servers going down from time to time, but we also hackers. And, if some hacker gets a hold of the state agency and shuts down the whole system, that's when backups really become worth the money.
Absolutely. It is frustrating to have to do that kind of thing. But in a prior life, I had founded a software company. And when we went to go do the demos, we would have the demo online. We would have a demo on a laptop. And actually, we ended up having it on two laptops. And as our final fail safe, we had printed PowerPoint slides just in case.
Exactly.
And because, two is one and one is nothing, right? You have to have redundant methods. And part of the problem is people switch to using something like AWS. The appeal is, it's spread across a bunch of servers. Yes, but if all that is going through a single bottleneck, you haven't actually provided multiple interfaces. You still have one. And so fortunately, I know we had a great conversation with the land commissioner, and I know they have taken some steps to improve their technology, and I know other agencies are doing so as well. Like we had Kelly Hancock, the acting controller, he was here on the program recently, and he talked about TexStat, and it's just now rolling out. But what would you hope to see from that, and what do you think we might see from that?
Yeah, I'm always, I do data for a living, so I'm going to say that I think that the more data that's available and that's out there, the better and more efficient I think agencies are going to be. From the comptroller's standpoint, the more information that they can provide on who's being paid by the state and what businesses are filing paperwork with the state, franchise tax statements, things like that. The more information, I think it's going to streamline state spending a whole bunch.
I think so too. And one of the things he was excited about was the economic activity information that they have just as a natural result of their sales tax tracking and reporting and their franchise tax tracking and reporting, and the ability for business owners and leaders to have access to that. He was very excited about.
Yeah, and I think that it can also be used to look for potential trends, in the near future, but also, a year or 2 years down, you could possibly see, I hate to use the R word, but, recession, you might be able to see that sales tax numbers are coming down just slightly, and then look at the past and see, is there a similar trend in the past, and, what happened in the months, the years after that happened.
Yeah, the only thing worse than anything negative happening is not having any warning that something negative is happening. Well, and an important function, not just in that office, but in all the agencies, is that they be good stewards of our funds and be careful about fraud and waste and preventing that from happening. How can or should they use the data they have available to build a model or work on avoiding those kinds of things?
Yeah, so I think I touched on it a few minutes ago. The rent, the issue of state agencies paying for office space across the state. I think that that's the perfect example of where state agencies could look to see, where spending could be changed. Are they paying 5 times the rent rates for an office, and the people across the hall from them are paying a fraction of what they're paying? Using the tools that they have in their own state agencies, using AI, it's possible to find some of these areas that could be streamlined a little bit better.
Well, and I hope with some of this advancement and with AI that while I know we're going to have plenty of data available on the big picture program, so the comptroller has made it very clear that he's dedicated to rolling out the educational freedom accounts, and that was a huge policy change that we got done this session. It's a big program that's going to be rolling out, and I fully expect that we'll see a lot of data quickly about who's applying and who's getting approved and all of that kind of stuff. That's exciting. How can, with 4,000 bills being passed, not just one, how can more legislative chairs, more interested advocates find out or work with agency heads to make sure to find out that the policy gains that we've gotten in are actually being implemented well?
Yeah, I think that it's a good question, but they have to put in goals and, not just, we feel like this bill that we implemented is doing what it's supposed to be doing, but put in actual, markers to say, okay, here's where we want to hit. If, we want to do X, Y, and Z, let's make sure that we're 25% of the way to doing that by, this date. So I think that that's how you use the data is, when session gets started up again and all of these agency heads have to go before their respective committees, they can say, here are the numbers, here are the graphs that showed that this worked. And also here are the graphs that showed that didn't work. So maybe we need to change that and, allocate funds elsewhere, away from the programs that didn't work.
I think that's absolutely right. And that's a good segue to, if you could suggest, if you can make the recommendation as somebody who's been working with data for decades and has seen it be very effective when used right, how would you recommend to an agency head that they build the agency data-based effort, right? How can they build a culture around making sure they know and do the right things based on the right data?
Sure. So I think the first thing is, learn as much as you can about databases and database management. And it's such a niche, area that a whole bunch of people don't, think of it as Excel, on a larger scale. So, if you've got a few minutes, ask, your database management, your IT staff, or if, you're embarrassed about that, go to AI and, just start asking questions to it and, kind of learning the infrastructure and what it takes to get a system in place that's efficient and does what you need it to do.
Well, and I would say based on my experience and based on what you were just talking about, a very important thing is to make sure you have the right people on board who do have experience dealing with complex data and complex data issues. And you have been doing that for a couple of decades. Thank you for the positive impact you've had and your firm doing both data and research. Could not recommend enough. I know people see your great write-up after every election or during every early voting of every election. That's a fantastic way to share your expertise. But I could not recommend enough. How can people reach out to you?
Sure. So I'm on Twitter at Longhorn Derek. X. I'm on X at Longhorn Derek. If you have any questions, you can email me at dryan@ryandata.com.
That's awesome. Thank you for coming.
Of course. Thank you for having me.